Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Britt Westbourne had always believed that redemption came in small, private victories, moments no one saw, choices no one praised, sacrifices that dissolved into silence the second they were made, but the night she quietly saved 3 lives and destroyed the evidence that could have buried Sidwell forever would become the defining line between who she used to be and the woman she had clawed, bled, and fought to become, yet, ironically, it was also the choice that cost her more than any mistake, scandal, or heartbreak ever had. Port Charles had seen countless secrets, but the chain of events Britt set into motion began with something deceptively simple, a flash drive burning a faint blue glow on her desk, a drive that contained Sidwell's darkest files, covert surveillance logs, off-book financial transfers, coerced confessions, and footage that could ruin reputations, end marriages, expose hidden crimes, and topple pillars of Port Charles' power like dominoes. Britt hadn't meant to get involved. She never meant to overhear Sidwell's call in the back hallway at General Hospital, never meant to follow him, never meant to discover what that drive really held. But the universe often pulled her into the center of storms she wanted nothing to do with, and that night would be no different. The first life Britt saved was a woman she barely knew, a nurse named Kira Malone, quiet, conscientious, always early, never the type to attract trouble, but Sidwell had marked her as a threat simply because she had seen too much. Britt found Kira trembling in the medication room, eyes glassy, a bruise blooming across her cheekbone from Sidwell's earlier warning. Kira had stumbled onto a coded message Sidwell sent through the hospital's pharmacy system, a message that linked him to a money laundering operation disguised as supply shortages. Terrified, Kira confided in Britt only because she had no one else, whispering that Sidwell had given her a final ultimatum: disappear quietly or be erased loudly. Britt recognized the tremor in her voice, the same fear she once lived with, the fear of being owned by someone more powerful, more ruthless, and absolutely without conscience. Without thinking, without pausing to consider the consequences, Britt hid Kira in a vacant patient room, scrubbed her badge access from the hospital system for 12 hours, and sent her home through the service entrance with a burner phone and strict instructions not to return until Britt gave the all-clear. The second life Britt saved was far more complicated, layered with history and betrayal and emotional wreckage that still clung to her ribs like old scar tissue: Brad Cooper. Despite everything they had been through, schemes, lies, heartbreak, and the long winding path to their fragile new friendship, Britt knew Brad didn't deserve to die for Sidwell's secrets. Brad had unknowingly been pulled into Sidwell's orbit through a lab error he had tried to correct, one that revealed Sidwell had been ordering toxicology reports on prominent figures in Port Charles, figures who had no idea their blood, their DNA, or their medical vulnerabilities were being logged in Sidwell's private archive. Worse, Sidwell discovered Brad had seen the metadata. Brad wasn't supposed to survive the night. Britt knew at the moment. 2 silent, expressionless men in dark coats arrived at the lab asking where Brad was. She lied, easily, smoothly, instinctively, saying he had left early. She then slipped through the stairwell, found Brad in the sub-basement storage room, and pulled him behind the linen carts seconds before Sidwell's men walked past. Brad nearly collapsed when Britt whispered, "I'm getting you out." He didn't ask questions. He simply followed. Britt smuggled Brad out of General Hospital using an emergency stairwell so old it wasn't even on the official floor plans anymore, a relic from the building's last major remodel decades earlier. She shoved him into her car, drove him to a safe house previously used by Cyrus Renault, one she never intended to revisit, and told Brad to stay put. Brad's voice cracked when he asked, "But what about you?" Britt shook her head and said, "I'll deal with Sidwell." She didn't add that she might not survive that confrontation. The third life she saved was one that ripped her heart open in a way she had never prepared for: Dex Heller. Dex had been investigating Sidwell under the table, digging into a series of missing person cases that had quietly been connected to Sidwell's network of intimidation. Dex was close to exposing everything, too close, and Sidwell knew it. Britt found Dex bleeding out in the alley behind the hospital, a gunshot wound hidden beneath his jacket, his breath ragged, his fingers ice-cold. She dragged him into the ER herself, bypassing triage, barking orders like a soldier instead of a doctor, taking complete control of the trauma room before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. She stabilized him with the skill of someone who had saved countless lives yet still believed she didn't deserve redemption. She kept him alive long enough to get him into surgery, and when the police arrived asking who shot him, Britt lied again, calmly, convincingly, dangerously. She said she didn't know. She said Dex had staggered in alone. She erased CCTV footage that showed her pulling him inside. She deleted time-stamped records that placed Sidwell's car near the loading dock. She rewrote the entire narrative of Dex's injury, placing herself squarely between him and the truth. But saving 3 people wasn't enough to stop the storm. The real turning point came when Britt finally faced the flash drive Sidwell had been using to threaten, blackmail, and manipulate everyone tied to those lives. She stared at it for a long time, weighing the power it held, power that could destroy Sidwell, but also shatter dozens of lives in collateral damage. The files inside could expose affairs, cover-ups, betrayals, illegal medical procedures, forged signatures, secret identities, and confessions people didn't even know they had recorded aloud. If she turned it over to authorities, Sidwell would fall, but so would everyone else caught in the blast radius. So Britt made the choice no one else would. She destroyed it. But she didn't destroy it impulsively. Britt studied the drive line by line, file by file, absorbing information that would haunt her forever. She saw the video of Kira blindsided in the hallway. She saw the metadata Brad had accidentally triggered. She saw the footage of Sidwell's men tailing Dex days before the shooting. She saw files on Nina, on Sunny, on Jocelyn, on Curtis, on Dante, on seemingly everyone, each file like a loaded gun pointed at the wrong person. Some of the footage was grainy. Some was crystal clear. Some was the kind of thing that made Britt cover her mouth, her stomach lurching, because the people she knew, the people she cared about, had no idea how close they were to ruin. And that was when she realized Sidwell wasn't just dangerous, he was catastrophic. Britt took the flash drive to the abandoned supply sub-basement, found the old incinerator that once burned hazardous biowaste before the hospital allocated its disposal to an external service, and turned it on manually. It took 7 tries. The machine groaned like a dying animal. The metal door screeched. The pilot flame flickered. But it lit. Britt held the flash drive between her fingers, feeling its cold, sharp edges that felt like Sidwell's grip on every life he touched. Then she tossed it inside. The plastic cracked. The circuitry curled. The evidence melted into bubbling fragments of nothing. She stood there long after it turned to ash, her chest tight, her eyes burning, because she understood exactly what the destruction meant. She had saved 3 lives, but she had also ensured she would now carry every secret alone. And that was the price that would slowly consume her. Within days, Sidwell realized the drive was gone. And Britt felt the consequences immediately. The first price she paid was isolation. People she cared about, Brad, Maxie, Austin, even a few nurses she once laughed with, noticed a change in her. She was quieter. Restless. Distracted. She caught herself jumping at sudden noises, flinching when someone touched her shoulder unexpectedly, glancing over her shoulder so frequently that it became second nature. Sidwell hadn't confronted her outright, but she felt his shadow everywhere, in the anonymous calls that ended as soon as she answered, in the unfamiliar cars parked outside her apartment, in the way she caught glimpses of movement in stairwells she entered alone. Sidwell didn't need proof to know she destroyed the drive. He only needed motive. And Britt had plenty. The second price was her career. Sidwell's influence stretched further than anyone realized, and Britt felt the silent retaliation begin with small, subtle strikes, unauthorized audits appearing in her email inbox, complaints filed about her patient interactions that she knew were fabricated, sudden policy violations she was accused of despite following protocol, and whispers that the hospital board was concerned about her judgment. She was suspended twice without cause. Both times, she returned to find her office rifled through. The third price was the moral weight of what she now carried. Even without the physical files, the knowledge remained, etched into her memory, haunting her like a library of sins she had no right to hold. She knew who was cheating on whom. Who was being blackmailed. Who had lied under oath. Who had hidden medical conditions? Who had falsified documents? Who had committed crimes buried years ago? She knew secrets that could break marriages, friendships, careers, and she couldn't tell a soul. Because revealing the truth, even for the right reasons, could put Kira, Brad, and Dex back in Sidwell's crosshairs. Her silence became both armor and prison. The fourth price was emotional exhaustion so deep it bordered on collapse. She couldn't sleep. When she did, she dreamed of burning plastic, gunshot wounds, hospital hallways drenched in floodlights, and shadowy figures reaching for her. Food lost its taste. Music irritated her. Laughter felt foreign. Romance became impossible. The part of her that once believed she could have a future, a family, a second chance at love, quietly crumbled under the weight of everything she had sacrificed. Yet Britt's breaking point came the night Sidwell finally approached her. Not with violence. Not with threats. But with a smile. He cornered her in the hospital corridor after a long shift, congratulated her on navigating a challenging month, and casually mentioned the names of the 3 people whose lives she had saved, Kira, Brad, Dex, in the tone of someone reciting grocery items. He leaned in and whispered, "You think destroying my drive saves you? It only means I have to start rebuilding my collection. And guess whose life I'll begin with?" Britt didn't flinch, but she felt cold spread through her veins like poison. That was when she realized the final price she would pay was the one she had always feared. To truly protect the people she saved, she would have to destroy Sidwell entirely, not his files, not his leverage, but the man himself. But doing that would mean crossing a line she had sworn to avoid, a line between redemption and the darkness she once embraced too easily. The tragedy, the irony, the heartbreaking reality of Britt Westbourne's transformation was simple. Saving 3 lives had cost her the freedom to live her own. But the part that made her truly dangerous, the part that Sidwell underestimated, was that Britt had nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose becomes a woman capable of ending even the most powerful monster in Port Charles. And deep down, Britt knew one thing with chilling certainty: the price she paid to save those 3 lives was only the beginning of the war she would now bring to Sidwell. But Britt's war against Sidwell didn't begin with some cinematic showdown or a calculated strike. It began in the quiet hours of the morning, when exhaustion made her honest and loneliness made her brave. She sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through her window like dying stars, and she realized that waiting for Sidwell to make his next move was a luxury she no longer had. The 3 people she saved, Kira, Brad, and Dex, were alive because of her decisions, but they were also vulnerable because of them. Britt understood the paradox instantly. She had to protect them, but the only way to do that was to eliminate the threat that still hunted them, a threat that had grown more determined since losing the drive. Sidwell wasn't just rebuilding his network, he was expanding it. Within days, new faces appeared in the hospital, disguised as security personnel, administrative assistants, even orderlies. They moved too quietly, watched too closely, asked too many questions. Britt noticed everything. She always had an uncanny ability to see patterns others ignored. It was both her gift and her curse. And now it was the only thing that could keep her ahead of Sidwell. She kept a notebook hidden behind her bathroom mirror, a list of names, times, movement patterns, overheard conversations, and suspicious requests entered into the hospital system after hours. It looked like paranoia, but it was strategy. Every entry was a clue. Every clue was a thread. And every thread led back to Sidwell. The more she tracked, the more she understood that Sidwell wasn't just protecting his influence, he was preparing for a takeover. He wanted full control of General Hospital. Not for medicine. Not for power. But because GH was the perfect hub for information, leverage, and access to the kind of people who mattered in Port Charles. Britt realized something chilling: destroying the drive hadn't erased his intentions, it had accelerated them. And so Britt began gathering allies, quietly, strategically, and without revealing the truth. She started with people who owed her favors, individuals with flexible moral compasses who could be trusted simply because they were too afraid to betray her. She spoke to a former tech specialist she once treated for a stab wound, persuading him to help her trace Sidwell's encrypted communications. She bribed a night shift janitor to give her access to off-limits mechanical rooms where Sidwell's men often held private meetings. She convinced a med student, terrified of losing her scholarship, to intercept certain supply orders coming into the building. Nothing violent. Nothing illegal enough to get her arrested. But effective. Every task she assigned tightened the net around Sidwell. And for the first time since the night she destroyed the drive, Britt felt the balance of power shift. Yet the real turning point came unexpectedly one evening when Brad showed up at her apartment unannounced, pale, breathless, trembling. He hadn't left the safe house since Britt pushed him inside, and seeing him at her door meant something had gone very wrong. Brad clutched a manila envelope in his shaking hands, and inside were printed photos taken of Britt herself. Some from across the street. Some from inside the hospital. Some at angles that suggested the photographer was far too close. The timestamps were from the last 48 hours. Brad whispered, "He's watching you now." Britt didn't argue. She knew it was true. Sidwell had shifted focus. Britt saving Dex was forgivable. Britt hiding Brad was annoying. Britt helping Kira disappear was inconvenient. But Britt destroying the drive? That was unforgivable. That was a declaration of war. And Sidwell was not a man who tolerated defiance. That night, Britt understood the nature of her enemy with terrifying clarity. Sidwell didn't want information anymore, he wanted her. Her surrender. Her silence. Her fear. But Britt had been afraid before. Fear didn't break her. Fear sharpened her. She took the envelope from Brad, shoved it in her drawer, and made a decision that would reshape every moment that followed. She was going to dismantle Sidwell's empire from the inside out, not through violence, but through exposure, strategic, surgical, devastating exposure. She couldn't resurrect the files she burned, but she could rebuild enough of the evidence through observation, witness accounts, patterns, and the remaining digital footprints Sidwell forgot to erase. She began by mapping Sidwell's movements through hospital logs, employee badge data, and patient file access. She cross-referenced suspicious pharmacy orders. She tracked supply chains. She analyzed financial anomalies that matched the timeline of his operations. The deeper she dug, the more she unveiled. Sidwell had created a labyrinth of shell companies, front organizations, and compromised hospital personnel over several years. He operated like a mafia boss hidden behind the veneer of a philanthropic board member. Britt realized that Sidwell didn't just blackmail people, he built psychological cages around them, cages so meticulously designed that no one even realized they were trapped. But Britt saw every bar, every padlock, every crack in the structure. She made herself indispensable to his operations by pretending not to notice. She positioned herself in places where Sidwell's men expected loyalty but not intelligence. She overheard every secret whispered in the wrong hallway. She watched every exchange of envelopes, every fake inventory check, every backdoor meeting disguised as a routine consultation. She could have been an FBI agent with the level of detail she accumulated. But this wasn't about justice in the legal sense. Britt wanted justice in the moral sense, the kind that protected the innocent, punished the corrupt, and ensured Sidwell never breathed comfortably again. Still, Britt knew none of her strategy mattered if Sidwell figured out what she was building. And he nearly did. One night, as she sat in the residence lounge compiling her notes into a coded summary, she felt someone behind her. She turned, and found Sidwell leaning in the doorway, watching her with a smile that made her stomach clench. He asked her what she was working on. Britt lied, said it was research for an infectious disease seminar. Sidwell approached slowly, casually, the way a predator stalks prey to make sure it's afraid. He took the folder off the table, flipped it open, and Britt felt her heart freeze. Because inside the folder wasn't her coded summary. It was an old case study she had grabbed absent-mindedly. Sidwell skimmed the pages, unimpressed, and handed them back with a dismissive nod. It was the closest Britt had ever come to being exposed. And it was also the moment she understood Sidwell wasn't as omniscient as he wanted her to believe. He wasn't invincible. He was human. Arrogant. Overconfident. Careless. And those weaknesses were the cracks she would widen until the entire structure collapsed. But the price of being this close to him, of shadowing him without being caught, grew heavier with each passing day. She stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She distanced herself from Brad to protect him, even though it hurt both of them. She ignored texts from friends. She avoided social gatherings. She locked her door twice, then thrice, then 4 times before going to bed. She no longer recognized the woman in her bathroom mirror. Not because she looked different, but because she looked dangerous.